living with diabetes, you might be concerned about the elevated risk if you contract COVID-19. And if you are working in a job that requires you to interact with the public, you might be looking for your employer to modify your work so that you are able to reduce the risk that you contract COVID-19. We can help. You can visit our website at diabetes.ca/coronavirus and download a letter that you can share with your employer, which encourages them to offer all reasonable modifications to the work of employees with diabetes to reduce that risk. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at 1-800-BANTING. Be well.
The fear that you guys are feeling is completely understandable, particularly given the amount of media coverage there has been around who the high-risk people are. At this present time, we still do not have data that differentiate between type 1 and type 2 diabetes with respect to those who've been admitted with COVID-19. What we do know, though, is that those living with diabetes are not at higher risk of getting COVID-19. However, the chance of more severe disease is there. Knowing that, though, given the age of the people that are admitted, given the prevalence of diabetes in the general population, I think it is safe to assume that the vast majority of the people admitted to hospital with COVID-19 and diabetes, in fact, have type 2 diabetes. What we also know at this point is that if you are admitted to hospital with COVID-19 and you have diabetes, those who have better blood sugar control in hospital seem to do better. What we do not yet know is whether control outside of hospital also portends better outcomes. And I think those data are coming and will be coming fairly soon. So for now, my advice would be to do what you can to control what you can. And what you can control are, of course, your blood sugars, your environment, ways to protect yourself from getting COVID-19, as all of us should. And always bear in mind what you cannot control, which is what's happening out there in the real world and also the virus itself. So therefore, focus on what you can control, take comfort in that, stay educated, and the data keep changing on an almost hourly basis, it seems. So I'm sure in the not too distant future, we will get the data that you're looking for, which is differentiating between type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
So the first thing that I would say is that type 1 diabetes has conventionally been thought of as being a childhood disease, and indeed people who develop diabetes before the age of 18 almost always have type 1 diabetes. However, recent evidence suggests that people can develop type 1 diabetes at any age, and there are cases of people in their 50s and 60s and 70s and even later developing diabetes, which actually is due to type 1 diabetes. We often think that type 1 diabetes has a familial connection, and that is true, but in fact most people who are diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 diabetes that is, don't have a family history. However, if you do have a family history of type 1 diabetes, it raises the suspicion that you might also have type 1 diabetes. And so rather than simply relying on age of diagnosis to be the key factor, some of the things which I would be interested to know in is whether there are any other autoimmune diseases that you have or that a family member has. Again, sometimes autoimmune diseases cluster in families, and one person might have thyroid problems, another might have celiac disease, and somebody else might develop type 1 diabetes. If you have been losing weight, that suggests insulin deficiency, that is, losing weight without trying. And that might raise the possibility that this is actually type 1 diabetes rather than type 2 diabetes. There aren't very many good tests which are guaranteed to discriminate between type 1 and type 2 diabetes at diagnosis. But as time goes by, people who we thought had type 2 diabetes, it sometimes does become clear that we were not correct. What we sometimes find is that the tablets don't work very well that we would normally expect to treat type 2 diabetes with. We also find that they respond with quite erratic blood sugar levels. And sometimes we find that we move people to insulin within the first year or two, whereas generally in type 2 diabetes, we don't expect to need to move people to insulin for 10 or even more years. However, because we use insulin in type 2 diabetes not uncommonly, sometimes we end up treating people as if they have type 2 diabetes, and we use just one shot of insulin per day. But it's very difficult to control type 1 diabetes with one shot a day, and we often hear about fluctuations in blood sugars, particularly after meals, and this would be another factor that would make me think, I wonder if this is type 1 diabetes. So I think in your case, if you ended up being very lean or slim, you had very poorly controlled diabetes that wasn't responding as might be expected to tablets or other non-insulin agents, I think I would ask the doctor to be referred to a specialist, in particular to ask the question, is this actually type 1 diabetes? Sometimes it gets referred to as late onset autoimmune diabetes of adults, or LADA. Some people have called it type 1.5, although that's not my favorite term, but then fractions never were my favorite subject. But the reality is that type 2 diabetes becomes very common as people get older, and so there can be overlap between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And I hope this helps answer your question, but it is a very difficult question which many doctors struggle with on a regular basis.